You are listening to a True North Eager Beaver media podcast. The True North Eager Beaver podcasts are proudly brought to you by our founding sponsors, the Miss V Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, your source for science fiction, fantasy, and cozy mysteries featuring a broad diversity of characters. CanadianTarot.com, your uniquely Canadian online eclectic tarot community and forum, and The Peppermaster, hot pepper sauces made from fresh farm ingredients to thrill your taste buds and expand your mind. Well, hello, kits. The Beaver Lodge asks its guests if they're willing to provide an extended interview so that we may better get to know what makes them tick. When they agree, we package it together and present it to you as part of this series. Welcome to Season 2 and episode number 26 of the True North Eager Beaver Interview Project, a series of extended chats with interesting Canadians who have things to say about which you should be aware. Today, recording day is Thursday, November 10th, the day before Remembrance Day here at the Beaver Lodge, and we wanted to take this occasion to have an interview with someone who will be able to speak to the day and a few other things that have been in the news lately. I'm your host, the Eager Beaver, pronouns he, him, hey, Mr. Beaver, and I'm especially happy that you, my dearest kitties, have joined Mr. Grizzly and I for this very, very special episode, because, as we keep on saying, lest we forget. So let's not. Our guest is a former member of our military. He served about 12 to 13 years, principally as a member of the Royal Canadian Navy, and still serves his country today as a history teacher. So, you know, once serving the country, pretty much always serving the country, as we say. So without too much more, why not just get into it? Please welcome. Oh, and he's a friend of the pod, and someone just an all-around great guy, one of the greatest guys you could ever meet. So I keep on calling him Kit Hugh. Welcome, Kit Hugh. You may want to give your full name for the listeners and viewers. Welcome.
Well, I was actually a beaver leader for a while, so and I was called Ringtail. So if you want to call me that, you can call me that if you want. But wow, that's a hell of an introduction. Thank you very much. I'm a history teacher by trade, and I've got a master's degree in war studies from Royal Military College. But principally right now, I'm actually teaching grade 9 math, which is actually more in tune with what I was doing in the Navy with trigonometry. So that's kind of fun too.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Well, you know what? I'm Air Force brat, military kid, lived all over the country on different bases. And one of the things that a good buddy of mine, we talked about this in the green room earlier about how he was a ship captain. He's retired from the military. He's a retired naval man. The amount of mathematics that one does on a ship is astounding.
Yes, it is. Not only are you keeping track of your position with respect to where you are on the water, but when you're dealing in the military, or in the Navy, you're also keeping track of where you are with respect to your other ships, whoever is guide, and you have to maintain a relative station with all those ships, and you have to be able to calculate very quickly where everybody is and where everybody is going. So you have to know where you are, where you're going to be 6, 12, and 18 minutes ahead of time, and make sure nobody's running into anything that's going to hurt them. It's a lot of work. It's a lot. I think, in all honesty, and I know Mars officers do have a bit of an ego, but I will say this, that it's probably up there with pilot as far as one of the most demanding officer trades in the military. As far as the mental aspect goes, I'm not talking about the physical. Well, the physical aspect is really hard too, because you have to. Anytime you're aboard a ship at sea, or anytime you're aboard a ship, period, you're actually in constant danger.
Right.
because as safe as we try to make everything, there's absolutely nothing safe about being aboard any ship. So civilian sailors, like I've got friends in the merchant marine, good friends, and people who sail professionally.
Mhm.
It's the same thing. Anytime you're at sea, you're in danger, and you have to be careful. But it was a hell of a fun job, and it was a great job when you're in your 20s. But once you get into your 50s, it starts to get a little more tough.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
From your child,
hopefully,
youthful
Oh
expenditure.
yeah, you need that.
They still want you very. Yeah, I get it. I get it.
um, so let's start at the beginning. Why is it that you opted for a military career?
Well, everybody in my family, actually, no, actually, my grandmother was in the service during the Second World War as well. But
Hmm.
basically, everybody in my family has served in one capacity or another. My grandfather was a test pilot in the Second World War. He was a bush pilot before the war, and so he's too old to actually fly combat. So they had him. He was taking like bombers out at zero altitude over Lake Erie in really wintry conditions there to get spray on the wings so that they'd ice up to the point where the airplane would almost stall out and fall into the water. And as he was doing that, he was busy writing notes down so that he could train the younger pilots who were going overseas to do combat with the procedures they need in order to make sure that the aircraft were they could fly the aircraft properly in these dangerous conditions.
Mhm.
He did a lot of that sort of stuff. Actually crashed several times, and he had a really bad back because of that. There was a ferry battle crash out of Rockcliffe, actually, in 1940, where he was test flying a new version of it. I think it was one of the ones, the ferry battles, just before when they were turning them into shipborne fighters. And yeah, and anyways, he had a massive major crash that he destroyed the airplane. He almost destroyed himself. But no, he did that, and he went on after the war to run the Ontario Provincial Air Service.
Wow.
Actually, he was also involved. He also started OPSU as well. He's one of the founders of OPSU, so I'm quite
Really?
proud of that too. Yeah, being a good socialist.
How cool is that?
Cool.
my great uncle, Laurie, who was probably closer to my father than my grandfather was a Royal Air Force. He wound up at the end of the war as a Royal Air Force group captain. He got a Distinguished Flying Cross for spotting the Italian fleet before the Battle of Cape. Oh shoot, I'm going to mess it up. Not Mars. I always want to say Marzipan. Marzipan. It was the one just before the British fleet, where Somerville was able to catch up with them and knock out basically their entire offensive force with battleships at point blank range. Tremendous naval battle. But he was flying a Sunderland flying boat out of Alexandria for most of the war, and he commanded a squadron out of there. And yeah, the story he told me, it was really cool. I was 14 years old. I'm sitting in Florida, and he was massive. He's an aeronautical engineer.
Hmm.
So like from 1925, when he was 14 years old, 15 years old, I think it was, in high school, he actually built his own airplane, like a model airplane, because that's all he knew how to do. Found an engine, put it on. The only thing that saved his life was that he didn't put the propeller on properly, and it fell off as he was trying to do his takeoff run, which made his father very happy. But
Got lucky.
anyways, he went on. He's flying a Sunderland flying boat. I don't know if you know what a Sunderland. Well, you know what a Sunderland is, I would imagine, Paul. But a Sunderland flying boat is a massive four-engine flying boat. Think of like the World War II version of a Seaborn 747.
Okay.
Four
Okay.
engines, huge airplane. They called it a flying porcupine because it had guns over the top of it and everything, and turrets. But it's a flying boat. He's flying it out of Alexandria. So they can do 24, 35. I think he had about 30-hour range on it. So you could actually go out and you could stay out for over a full day. So they had extra crews on board. Anyways, they're doing their patrol route over it would be to the east of Crete. And he said, and we're flying along, and he says, I hear this rattling noise from down below. Now, down below, when you're on the flight deck of Sunderland, is 2 stories down.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like these are big airplanes.
Oh, yeah.
And so he calls back through the voice pipe to one of his crewmen. He says, Bill, just go down there and check that hatch there, because they've got hatches on the side in the lower areas that sometimes rattle loose and everything, and just make sure they're dogged down. Well, this guy goes down the ladder, and he goes down and he looks down, and Laurie says, and Paul looks down, and Paul called back up, and he said, it's not the hatch, it's the Italian fleet, because there's a massive hole where an artillery shell blasted, and it blew a hole in the bottom of the flying boat. And this poor guy's looking down, and he sees the Italian fleet below him, like 12 destroyers and heavy cruisers and a couple of battleships with all their guns pointed up directly at them.
Wow.
And so they got out of there, but they were able to target the fleet, and that allowed Somerville to close in and gave them the targeting information they needed to sink many ships. So that's how I got his DFC. That was pretty cool.
So I think that's the Battle of Cape Matapan, or
Matapan, that's it. Matapan.
Okay, yeah.
Not Marzipan, Matapan.
Yeah. 1941, late March.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
He actually went on after the war. He came back to Canada, and he decided he was done with it. And he came back, and he was a bush pilot, and he was flying out of Sioux Lookout, Ontario, which was his hometown. And he was flying, I think he was flying Beech 18 float planes. And so he's just doing bush pilot work. And the RAF called him back at the time of the Berlin airlift and said, you're being recalled for active service. And he said, no, I did my tour. I'm done. Because he was in from about 1933 all the way through to the end of the war. He was a group captain. He's a full colonel in the military, like in the Army today, or in the Air Force today. So he didn't want to go back. So the RCMP came out, and they escorted him back, and he went back, and he actually flew Sunderlands into the lakes in Berlin there to support the airlift.
Wow.
So it was his last combat engagement.
Voluntold he was, right? That's what they call it. You've been voluntold. You're going to.
Oh yeah. Well, there were 2 officers. He said, yeah, there are 2 officers. They came up to the dock and everything. He said, you've been told you're going back. And he's like, but I'm in Canada. And they're like,
Wow. Okay, so you had family members that were part of the military, so it's a bit of a tradition. What made you? I'm not very familiar with it. So when you enter your basic training, how does that go, and then how do you decide whether or not you're going Air Force, Navy?
You decide before.
Infantry?
I joined in the reserves. So I went down to the HMCS Prevost, which was what they call a stone frigate. So basically it's a building, but it's related to the Navy. So we name everything a ship. And I went down to Prevost because one of my friends who I was in residence with was Sean Batty, who's a captain he was actually the commander of HMCS Prevost. Captain Sean Batty. He decided he'd join up, and I thought, shoot, that's a cool uniform. That looks like fun. So I went down and I joined up right after him. So we were naval cadets together, and so I joined up as an officer because I was in university and I already had my high school and everything. And I was selected, and you have to do a primary selection. So they're sort of like putting the square pegs in the square holes to make sure that you can actually tie your shoelaces. They decided that I was competent enough, strangely. And I went on. I actually did the Mars training. Now, the basic training, the way it works is phase training for any trade, officer or NCM, non-commissioned member, is the same. It's an incredibly detailed and disciplined tactical process, or like technical process. For a recruit to go overseas to fight in a war, it's not like what's happening in Russia right now, which is an absolute horror show, right. Where people are being pulled off the street and are being given some semblance of a uniform and a gun. Some of them actually are like 19th century type firearms, a Mauser Nagant. I've got a couple of those in my basement, for heaven's sakes. They're antiques, and they're being sent off the front. In Canada, what you have to do is you have to go through a tremendous amount of training before you can even go near a ship, let alone go overseas. For me, it started with shore phase in unit, like in every like couple of nights a week in London. when I was in school, and a couple of weekends a month going away to training to do small ship stuff. By the summer came around, I would go away and I did a 12-week basic training course at Albert Head, just outside of Victoria, which is the most beautiful place on the planet. Oh my God, it's heart-achingly beautiful. If I could move back there now, I would. And so we were there for 12 weeks, and we learned how to do all the military stuff: shine your shoes, keep your kit straight, march, be able to behave and deport yourself as an officer. Only after 12, 14 weeks of basic training like that, were we actually even allowed near a ship. My first ship, which I was very fortunate to get, was HMCS Kootenay, which is a very storied ship in the Canadian Navy. My HMCS Kootenay 258 was one of an improved Restigouche class destroyer escort. Okay, that doesn't mean much to anybody who doesn't know much about ships, but what it means is it was what was called at the time in the 1950s and 60s a Cadillac. It was the premier anti-submarine warfare ship on the planet.
Okay.
And even in the 1990s, when I got her and she was towards the end of her career, it was still a damn beautiful ship. It was twin screw, massive power, capable of over 30 knots. Threw up a rooster tail. You could actually water ski behind it if you actually tried to. I always wanted to, never was able to. But she also is famous for in the 1969 having an engine room fire where there was an explosion in the engine room that almost cost the ship. They almost lost the ship over it. There were many casualties. It was the most severe civilian seafaring accident the Canadian Navy had since the Second World War.
Okay.
And when I served aboard her, you could still see scars of that damage, like in the engine room. When, as an officer cadet, you have to understand every aspect of the ship. You have to be able to go into the engineering. You have to, and you have to get signed off that you understand all these things by the various people in charge of every aspect of the ship. In the engine room, my God, and in these spaces where the crew were trying to escape during this fire and everything, you could still see where there was damage, where the stairs, the ladders going up were sort of warped from the fire and everything. So that was a very sobering reality that every moment you're at sea, it is a life and death situation. You have to be careful.
Well, it's one of those things where unless the ship is docked in a harbor somewhere, and even then, it's still a dangerous situation. You cannot let the sea take advantage of you, because it will in a heartbeat. It will swallow you up whole, and you're gone, and that's it. It's done. It's forget about it. I mean, I've had a number of friends that I grew up with who joined the military, went into the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy, and every single one of them has said, you put that uniform on and you walk a different line, and you realize your job, who you may think is not that important, there are people relying upon you to do that job, and if you don't do it correctly, lives are lost.
On a bridge watch or on a ship's watch, when a ship is at sea, just steaming on regular peacetime steaming mission, you've got people, you've got lookouts, you've got your bridge crew, you have people doing all the jobs. You have somebody called a lifebuoy sentry who is at the stern of the ship looking over the rail. He's got a button to press. He's got a Kisby ring, those big lifebuoy rings,
right,
and markers and smoke markers and things like that. His sole job, and you rotate through the watch, but whoever's on that position for half an hour at a time, their sole job is to constantly maintain their vigilance. And if they see somebody in the water, and we test this because we always do emergency, like man overboard drills, an Oscar drill, they have to, like, if anybody falls asleep on that is a very, very serious offense, because this is it. That's the only. I've actually had the opportunity of being the Oscar. Usually, you've got a dummy that's got a life vest on that weighs about the same as a person, and you toss over the side just to make sure that everybody's doing their thing. The fleet standard is 5 minutes from the alarm being pressed to the person being back on board. as an officer of the watch, you have to understand like what your ship's course and speed is at whatever time it is, where the wind is, and all that stuff, so that when you hear this, you know exactly what to do. You have to do a Williamson turn in order to come back down on your base track, so that you're coming right back down where you were, so that you're putting your proper side alongside where the man in the water is, so you're protecting him from the wind, so you're going down on them, and you can recover them very quickly with a seaboat or with a helicopter or by diver or however you're doing it. So that's it's every moment you're at sea, it's a risk. But even alongside, I mean, I had an incident in oh my God, it was Seattle Harbor, where a couple of sailors, who the junior officer of the watch, we had trainees on board, and I had what we call jouts, junior officers under training. And I was actually gone ashore with a couple of friends. We went down for a couple of pints, and we're coming back, and we hear all these sirens going towards the dock, and we're like, huh, that's bad. Yeah. Like, oh shit, that's where we are. Oh God. So we boot our way back there. A couple of guys decided that no, the officer of the watch said, you're too drunk to go ashore, you go back to your racks. And they decide, no, we're going to slide over the front rope, bow rope, and head off into town. They did. We didn't know that, but the officer of the watch, being diligent, being junior, and doing his job, realized that, holy crap, I'm missing these two guys. And so he pressed the alarm, and we had the entire harbor, like the police, the American Coast Guard, the American Navy, everybody was there. It was very embarrassing. But it's an indication that even alongside, like, you fall down, if you make a misstep, you can break your foot, you can break a toe. I've broken 5 toes at least on various ships just walking around.
Well, geez, right? You can get tossed about. You can get a concussion, a broken.
That's different. yeah. When it gets lively out there, it's kind of cool. Like, one of the cool things about the old destroyers was, if you're number 2 mess, which is one deck down below number 1 mess, there's a big ladder there. It's right up at the front of the ship. At the bow of the ship or the stern of the ship, you get more of the motion than you do in the middle. And if you time it right, and you're going through heavy seas, if you time it right, you can just jump, and you don't even have to use the ladder, and you can make it to the upper level and grab on.
Wow!
But there's a big diesel main up top, so you have to be careful, because you usually crack your head off it.
Now, you said that you were an Oscar boy once, so that means that
I went over.
Or you jumped into the water, or
What you do is you put on what they call a survival suit. Yes. And so you've got this massive, huge survival suit on. It's a big, beautiful. I think ours were Mustang made, and you jump into the water, and you're floating, and you're fine, and you're warm and everything, but you're right at water level, and you can't see somebody when they're at water level in heavy seas, and it's really a very disconcerting experience when you're watching your ship going away from you.
Well, and those survival suits are great for a limited amount of time. They're like, what, 20, 30 minutes max? And
not bad.
Yeah.
Depends on the time of year. Your survival, like in the winter in the North Atlantic, even in a survival suit, you're still looking at maybe half an hour tops.
Max. Yeah.
And that's not even talking about drowning, because you're getting overtopped by waves and all that sort of stuff.
Or hit by ice, or a million other things. It's like somebody said to me, they watched an episode of what was it? Those World's Most Dangerous Jobs, and they showed the Alaskan king crab fishermen on the deck of the boat, and I'm like,
those guys, oh my God, I've got so much respect for those guys. That is
real. That is real. Like, that is not an exaggeration. When somebody goes overboard, it's like, if you don't get them right away, that's it.
You've got minutes.
Yeah,
you've got minutes to get somebody. That's why the fleet standard is 5 minutes, and that's on a good day. And even in tropical seas, you can get hypothermia and die very quickly, even if you don't drown.
Well, yeah, because despite the fact that the water is warm, it depends on where you are. You know, you hit a thermal climb.
Even if the water is relatively warm, like 70 degrees, it's still below your body temperature. And if you're exposed to it for a certain amount of time, you still die.
Because it just pulls your heat out of your body, right? And you can't survive. So
I just assumed if I ever fell overboard for real, I was gone.
Well, and so many people that I know that throughout their lives and their careers in the Navy said the same thing. It's like, if I went overboard, I wasn't, if they get me, they're great, but otherwise I just,
Yeah,
the
that's
old saying that pilots would say, put your head between your legs and kiss your ass goodbye.
about it.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Now, something that's always interested me, because I mean, clearly when you're in the military, you're living in, smaller quarters, you're sharing barracks and that kind of stuff. But on a ship, that's even smaller. So how does that work? I mean, how do you manage, if you're on a tour for, I don't know how long they last, but like, how do you like end up not just like,
Killing each other?
yes, and like, what do you do when someone gets on your nerves, and where do you go to get like a you moment? And like, how does that work?
A you moment. Oh, okay. Oh, well, I was lucky because I was an officer, so I actually had I had more or less I had a cabin I had shared with another officer. For other ranks, you're dealing with messing with 15, 20 guys at a time. It's a little different now. Some of the newer ships have smaller messing situations, and it's a little better. But yeah, it's still that's the same thing as what you deal with as a high school teacher. Actually, I was amazed at how similar it was when I transferred over into education, that the things that I'm doing, like sorting out problems between various people in high school, is very, very similar to what I was doing in the military. It's a very similar.
And how
Things
about,
build up. No, I'm serious. Like if you're at sea and you're doing a what they call a 1 and 3 watch rotation, just standard steaming watches. So you're on for 4 hours, you're off for 6 hours, and after a while, day and night is just an astronomical phenomena that you check your gyro by, because you forget, like you're just into this zone.
right.
Uh, people get into things build up, tensions build up, you get occasional altercations, and you have to be able to sort that out. So most of the time you do it just like you do in high school. You do it with just happiness and just humanity, and you do your best because everybody's in it together.
Hmm. Now, with Navy also, they always think submarines. So did you ever have to do that?
No, no,
No.
those guys are different. Those guys are, I've got tremendous respect for submariners, because their training is sort of like surface training, but it's got a lot of extra stuff, because every person on a submarine, because it's a small ship, boat, they call them a boat, but it's a small vessel. Everybody on board has to be able to compensate and do everybody else's job.
Mhm.
So everybody has to know how to do basically everything. It's a very intensive training. And they when they're at sea, it's a lot closer, it's a lot tighter. When I was in the Navy, I don't know too much about the new Victoria classes and the newer submarines. Mine were the O boats that we had, which were basically like super U-boats.
Yeah.
They were essentially, they're World War II type diesel electric submarines. They're much better and much and bigger and everything like that. But it was the same thing. Those guys were doing what they call hot bunking, where you only have maybe about half the bunks for the entire crew, so everybody shares a bunk. So one guy gets up and goes on watch, somebody else comes off and takes over the rack. So it's a lot tighter quarters.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
And the bathing is a lot different, and you have to be very, very specially trained on how to use the toilet properly, because you can sink the ship if you fuck up the toilet. I'm sorry, I shouldn't
Whoa,
swear.
whoa, 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 whoa. Tell me more about that.
Well, there's valves and
Sure.
pressure, and yeah. But one of the things that that somebody told me years ago, a friend of mine, his brother served on a sub.
Mm-hmm.
And he said one of the things that was striking to him was that they teach you right away that, look, you might not survive this.
Mm-hmm.
It
Every time you submerge, you're in death. You're in death zone.
literally,
Like diving. It's like diving anything. It's like scuba diving, really. I mean, it's the same problem. You're in a completely alien environment at sea.
you're not meant to be there.
There's nothing there that can support you. It's all your technology and your training and your team. That's all you can rely on.
So,
Mm.
do you want to explain the toilet to him?
Well, I'm not checked out on the toilets. I just know this from talking to submariners, because Tim Curry, who was my training officer when I was doing my Mars 3 phase, was a submariner, and but he said that on the Oberons, The toilets were such that if you didn't discharge them properly and you didn't close one valve before you opened the other valve, you could cause a flood into the ship, which could be quite critical. I don't think it'd sink the ship, but it would certainly cause a hell of a mess and a lot of flooding and problems.
And they would convince you that you could sink the ship. So it's like, do your job well.
Yeah, you have to know everything. You have to do everything properly. So even ablutions and bowel movements have to be done to the numbers.
Oh yeah, it's no joke. Like, to be a submariner, it's not for everyone.
Mm-mm.
It takes.
I've been in subs. I've toured in subs, and I've done a day steam in a sub, which was kind of fun. But that was basically like being a military tourist.
Yeah.
And it was in an American Los Angeles class attack sub. I got to dance the Macarena on the forecastle. That was kind of fun. Well, they forgot about this much acoustic padding on them, so
Right.
it's sort of like jumping on a big, huge bouncy mat, and it's
Okay.
a lot of fun. But they like us. The American submariners and American Navy in general likes the Canadian Navy, especially because they are dry and we are wet. So whenever we show up, they kind of make us friends.
Douglas.
Oh,
Tours.
okay. Just that one just dawned on me. It took me a couple of seconds to figure that one out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I imagine that goes on too. Actually, the best time ashore I think I had with an American submarine crew was in a lesbian bar in where is that? Olympia, Washington. USS Olympia was the name of the ship, and it was I guess the bicentennial of the town or something like that. We were there as a port visit, and this submarine pulls up beside us as a port visit, and it's Sunday night. The only bar in town is apparently this lesbian bar. And so we all went in there, and it was a great time. It was a beautiful place. Lots of pool.
Lots of pool. Yes,
Lots of
definitely.
pool.
That I can vouch.
Lots of plaid.
Now you
Right, that northern Washington, what the Americans call the Pacific Northwest, or we refer to in Canada as the Pacific Southwest, technically speaking, right? They go, Vancouver, isn't that the Pacific Northwest? No, in Canada, that's the Pacific Southwest.
Right.
Yeah, for us.
The Yukon.
Now you say that you're one of the things that you did in the military was to be a Mars officer.
Mhm.
Could you maybe explain to our listeners what that is and what that's about?
Mars officer, which is the trade is called 71B or 71 Bravo, but it's surface operations. So you're in charge. You're the guys who are running the bridge of the ship, running the operations. You're the officers in charge of either the deck department, the operations department, whatever's going on the ship. Training officer, executive officer, captain. Those are all Mars officers. The other officer trades on board most Canadian ships, like they're logistics officers who are in charge of supply and things like that, and they're very important. And there are MAR-E officers, which are the maritime engineering officers who are in charge of the ship's engineering systems.
Mm-hmm.
But Mars is mostly it's the operations. So you're doing much more with respect to tactics, understanding combat, understanding the tactical environment, doing the communications with other ships and other countries and stuff like that. So it's basically the meat and potatoes of the officers aboard a ship. That do that sort of stuff. And a lot of the MARIs and Lagos also cross-train in that, or some of them do, so that they're also competent in being able to backstop on those jobs as well. So that's what we do. So navigation was essentially my specialty, or well, not my great job, because I'm not the best navigator. My goal is to go from point A to point B without getting caught, and I didn't do the navigating officer's course because I'm not that great in math, but I was at least competent enough that I didn't run into anything. So I'm proud of that.
Besides being a Mars officer, what other activities or other positions did you hold?
Well, I mean, sure, I did. Let's see, I did 2 years at Royal Military College, and I was basically as a student there. I was doing a master's degree in war studies.
Okay.
So I completed that in 1996, I think. And after that, I got a job working for Romeo Dallaire, Lieutenant General at the time, Romeo Dallaire,
Oh.
in Ottawa as his staff officer to help him with his with the Rwanda files, because he was ADM per, so he was Associate Deputy Minister Personnel in the Canadian military, but he was also, because of his previous commitment in Rwanda and the War Crimes Tribunal, he had a lot of stuff that he had to deal with the files of that.
Mhm.
And so I helped him with a lot of his managing all the Rwanda files. I was able to go through basically 8 filing cabinets and organize his all the papers, every telegram, every cable that he sent to the UNHQ about Rwanda, and I learned what a horrible shit show that he had to deal with was.
Absolute hell.
Yeah, I actually met his mother once too, and I was very happy about that. Beautiful lady. She's Dutch. Well, no, his dad was a Van Du, and he went over. Of course, he was a vet in the Second World War. He was a sergeant in the Van Dus, and he went over, and Romeo was a child of a war bride, and his mother came back with her husband to Montreal and raised him. And it was kind of fun because I was sitting there and I was driving him through Montreal on our way back from a speech that he was giving. And and we stopped in, visited his mom, and of course he's very, very ADHD, very, I have to get going and doing things. And his mom's like, sit down, Romeo, I'm talking to Hugh. I'm like, ooh, that's kind of cool. So I was just a junior officer.
You just sit and listen to this.
Yeah. And he's like, okay, Mom.
I wanted to ask, because Remembrance Day is coming, and well, I guess before we get into the other stuff, because we've seen some people wear medals to certain events that kind of make us question whether or not they should have. But for you, because I mean, you've left the military at some point. What does the day mean to you, and why do you think it is important to be highlighted by people who haven't served?
When I was 8 years old, my grandmother in Lakefield, she had a neighbor who she called Young Bob, but at that time he was like an elderly man. I don't know how old he was, but he would work in his garden. And I remember talking to him, because I always talked to him a lot. And he was working one day, it was a hot summer day, and he was working shirtless. And I noticed he had these scars, like these pucker marks across his chest and on his back as well. And I was, what's that? And he's like, oh, that was a little present that Jerry gave me at the Somme. And I'm like, oh, what's that mean? And he didn't really explain it too much. And it wasn't until a lot later that I realized that he did actually charged a machine gun nest and got stitched by 4 bullets.
Yeah.
And survived. And but I mean, that stayed with him for the rest of his life. That was like my first real experience with like a veteran that I saw as a veteran. Like my grandfather, yeah, he fought in the war, and my great uncle, he was an officer in the war and everything like that. But it's a day of sadness, and for me, it's gotten even more poignant because when I was a kid, we had a time when veterans were old, when veterans were the elderly. They were guys who were like, well, let's be nice to them because they're not going to be around too much longer, and they did something really nice for us back in the day. We don't have to worry about that. Now the veterans are like guys that I friggin' taught.
Yeah.
I know people who are dealing with massive post-traumatic stress issues that are being untreated, are dealing with neglect. I've seen people are living in streets.
Yeah.
I mean, I attended several ramps. I live in Belleville, so I attended several ramp ceremonies at like repatriation ceremonies at Trenton when people were being brought back from Afghanistan. It's, I don't know what Remembrance Day means anymore, except anything but sadness. I look around, I don't see us doing anything any different or any better.
I'm not going to argue with you on that. It's great that we're all really observant today. And I think the youth have really sort of awoken to the fact that we have what we have because of the sacrifices of others. But I don't think we've improved the lives of our veterans. And I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here, so please bear with me for a second. But a man who's been vilified, and justifiably so, because he's dug his own hole. He has dug his own hole, and he's created a lot of problems. And I'm talking about Jeremy McKenzie, a veteran who served the country well, but went through hell in Afghanistan and saw things that would twist anybody's head around. Now, he comes back home and he does not get the support that he desperately needed.
Mm-hmm.
And I have said time and time again, look, I have no empathy for him, but I do have a ton of compassion. Mm-hmm. He has become a very hate-filled, angry individual who has done a lot of terrible things. Mm-hmm. But we've let him down. Mm-hmm. We've let him down because he needs help. This man has severe PTSD. And he says, I'm fine. I'm like, no, you're not fine, dude. There's videos of him talking about what he experienced there, and he got no help when he came home. None. The reason he is so twisted, the reason he is so angry, the reason he is so filled with rage and hate is because we let him down as a nation. And we need to take account to that we as citizens of this country who take for granted the freedoms that we have, and we have more freedoms than most nations on earth. Forget about lockdowns, mask mandates, provincial mandates, whatever. We still had more freedoms than most nations on earth, number one. And number two, we have not taken care of our veterans accordingly. And this man who has committed crimes and should pay for them will unfortunately probably never get the help he so desperately needs. So am I empathetic towards him? No, I'm angry. I do not like the man. He said horrible, terrible, hateful, angry things. But we created this monster and we've done nothing to fix the problem as a nation. And I'm going to wear that. I'll wear it. I will. And I will stand in the streets and fight against what he's saying and what he's preaching. But at the same token, I will also demand that we provide this gentleman, and somebody's going to hate me for using that term, but provide this gentleman the service and the help he so desperately needs. Because like it or not, he was a veteran. He is a veteran. He did serve the country. He did spend time in Afghanistan. He lost his innocence, his hope, his dreams. All of that was destroyed by what he went through, and he will never get it back. And if we are to make ourselves a nation that we want to be, that hopeful beam of light, we need to make things right. We need to fix these people. There's so many of them that came back that are damaged beyond repair psychologically, and we've done nothing to repair it. And that is embarrassment and a stain on our nation.
Yeah. A nation's military is always a reflection of the entire society. You have a cross-section of everybody in your military. You have good people, you have bad people. You have wonderful men, women, you have jerks and assholes. Mm. That's always been thus. When we commit people to a situation like combat, I've not had any experience with actual combat. I've been close enough to it to know that I don't want anything to do with it. And I'm very fortunate that I haven't suffered from that, because it changes you. Mm. My point here is that we need to say, okay, one service does not make you a good person or a bad person. It's something that has happened. I really feel uncomfortable when people thank me for being like having served in the military, because like honestly, I joined the military to pay my university debt off. I didn't do it for love of country. I did because I knew my family was in it and it was kind of cool and I was really into it and it was fun. I did it for me. I didn't do it for anybody else. So that, but I was young then, and I've learned a lot since. And one of the things I've learned is that like when veterans come home, you're absolutely right. We do not treat them well. We have not done that. We did not do that well after the First World War. We did not do that well after the Second World War. We fucking forgot everybody in Korea.
Oh yeah, they don't exist.
I mean, who anybody talked about anybody who spent time in Vietnam peacekeeping in North Vietnam during that war? No, nobody cares about that. I've known some of those guys. They had to dodge American bombs.
Yeah.
There's so many people, and I served at a time where war was in the past, so the military was sort of like under really valued. So I think about these things a little bit more, I guess. But now we've got a generation of kids who have come back from combat, who have been exposed to watching friends' heads explode,
Yes.
from shooting at somebody who they think is the enemy and watching a kid die.
Yes.
And they have to live with that. And nobody is helping them. VAC, they try to, and I know guys, I know colonels in the military who have spent their most of the later career working with helping to like decompress these guys as they come back and support them and help them to integrate them back into society. Military has tried to do that, but we still don't put much money into it. I mean, I think of back during a lot of this was when the Conservatives were in power, and yeah, I won't stop. I'll just stop there before I swear.
It's okay. It's okay. I know where you're going with that, and I'm not going to argue with you. We're on the same page when it comes to that. And I have seen, like my father, retired military, never saw combat. He was, Air Force. He retired in the mid-90s, and he had a good career, but he did suffer injuries in his career in the military, and he had to fight tooth and nail to get his compensation. And here's the best part. They tried to fight him left, right, and center to try and not pay him out. And at one point, he was just so exasperated. He's like, I just can't see. And my sisters were like, no damn way. You are not giving up. You are owed this. You gave your life to this country, and you are owed what you are owed, and you're going to damn well get it. So thankful for both my sisters who have fought tooth and nail to make sure he got his I don't know, just rewards. That's not even a thing, because there's like, the man can barely walk today because of an injury he suffered in his workplace. He can barely walk. If he was a civilian, he'd be a multimillionaire, because they would have paid him out millions upon millions to make him go away. But the VA fought for decades with him to not pay him. Literally not pay him. Finally, they did, and it took years of fighting and letters, and they tried to accuse him of saying, well, this is a cute one. I had a car accident in 1986. In the spring of winter of 1986, January, February, something like that. I was driving the car. It was my dad's car. I got hit head on, spun the car around, no serious injury to myself. And they tried to say, well, Gord, that was where you injured your back. And he goes, I wasn't in the car. It was my car. My son was driving it. And I had to swear in an affidavit. Like, they did everything they could to avoid paying him. His injuries he suffered in the military. This is another example of how our country, this is a stain on our nation. And tomorrow we're going to stand there and salute and say, we're so proud of you and thank you for your service. And we're still going to fuck these guys over the next day.
I've got a great one for you. I had several years ago at another high school I was teaching at in Belleville. I had a student teacher. He was a lieutenant colonel in the RCR, retired, like recently retired. And he decided to go back, and he did his teacher's degree. So he came on, and he was my student teacher for a while. Okay, battalion commander. He's been in charge of a freaking battalion, an infantry battalion. So this guy understands paperwork. He understands the bureaucracy. He's been through all this stuff. He's done staff college. He's got a master's degree. Okay. Well, he's RCR, so he's infantry. So his knees are shot. They're done. That's all that happens. I don't know anybody over 50 who's been in the infantry whose knees aren't broke.
They're finished.
Yeah, they're done. Anyways, so he has to go in and apply for a pension to get his knees replaced. Okay, they refuse it. Okay, he goes back and he goes through all the paperwork. It takes him months. He gets one knee. They pay for one knee. He has to do a complete other application to get his other knee fixed, because apparently it didn't happen at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, that's a battalion. No, that's a battalion commander, a lieutenant colonel, somebody who understands the military bureaucracy. You tell me how effective a private or a corporal is going to be in going up against that bureaucracy and trying to get treatment for the same freaking condition.
They're not. And what was the fella out in Alberta? I'm going to say Alberta. I could be incorrect, but Rick Mercer did a thing about him, and I watched the documentary on this guy. He had to write a letter and go to his doctor each year to say, yes, my legs that were blown off in Afghanistan have not grown back. I need money. I need money for prosthetics. I need a wheelchair. I need this. Well, we need you to verify that. Legs don't grow back. We don't have the technology to do that. Like, and I get a little bit animated and a little bit excited because, God damn it, why the fuck would I not be? These are young men and women who have given so much of their youth to this nation that it's irrevocable damage has been done to these people, physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically. They will never ever be the same. Look, I've got a buddy lives a couple of blocks away. I used to meet him at the pub. We don't talk anymore. He has a lot of psychological issues. You remember when that truck was blown up and it was there was a civilian that was in the truck. It was a G-Wagon that was blown up. It was attacked in Afghanistan.
Yep.
A diplomat, I believe. Anyway, so my time was the guy who was sent to clean up. So he showed up with a garbage bag and was scooping body parts into it. He, guess what, was in the reserves. He wasn't even Reg Force.
Yep. Oh, don't even get me started on the effect of on the difference between Reg Force and reserves when it comes to post deployment like support and everything. There's none. Basically, you get off the plane, you go back to your home unit, you go home and pick up your job, and you're next day at the hardware store or whatever, and it's like, what the fuck's wrong with you?
Well, I just spent 2 days cleaning up body parts and scooping up brains and putting them into a garbage bag to bring them back to the base to try and identify this person through DNA. What's wrong with me? My head is fucked.
We need time. The people need time. They need, and this is something, and it's not just like a Band-Aid solution. We're talking about, if you're going to expose people to this shit, you better be responsible for them for the rest of their lives. Yes. And you better look after them for the rest of their lives. And Absolutely. If you don't do that, don't ever commit them to friggin' combat.
Period.
It's that easy.
It's that easy. Yeah, I mean,
there's no such thing as a good war. There are necessary wars, perhaps. I think what's happening in Ukraine is tragedy. I understand why the Ukrainians are defending their territory, and I would be doing it exactly the same way they are.
Them shows.
But anytime you engage in combat, whether you're doing it for good reasons or bad reasons initially, it's going to result in evil. That's all it is. War is evil.
Yep.
I don't know. It's
no, I hear you. I hear you. Everything.
With respect to vets, I just think that we used to have a saying in the Navy that, and I apologize if I offend anybody, but we used to say that I love the fucking Navy and the Navy loves fucking me. That's
a real statement. That's realistic. That's reality. I mean, you know, everybody joins for their own reason. Mm-hmm. Some join because they want to, like my grandfather. He died at 99 in I'm going to say 95. It might have been 94. I can't remember the exact year. So I knew him. I knew him well. I grew up with him. He told stories to myself and my father that nobody else had ever heard, ever. talking about trench warfare and what he went through. So he initially was part of the RCR because he grew up on a farm and he knew horses, but he didn't want to do that. He wanted to be a tank commander. So he was going to reenlist after a little while, and then he said they were out on patrol and they came across the tank and they looked in the tank and they saw that it was nothing but sausage meat, basically. He's like, I don't want to do that. So he became a CMCG, Canadian Machine Gun Corps. And that's how he spent the rest of his tour. And he got there in 1915 and he stayed there till the very end. Mm-hmm. And at one point, he was gassed in, and I can't remember the name of it. It was in Belgium. He was gassed and
Ypres?
For dead. Ypres, yes, Ypres. Thank you. They left him for dead, and they thought he was dead, and they took his body and they threw it onto a pile of dead bodies and brought it to the morgue. And when they went around tagging the toes, he was conscious, but he couldn't move. He was like in a state of catatonia. And when they went to put the tag on his toe, he was able to kick his foot, and the doctor said, holy shit, this one's alive. So they realized, and they sent him to convalesce, and he convalesced in London and then back to the front like 3 weeks later. So you're 20 years of age. It's in 1915, right? You're 20. You're from a small town in southern Ontario. So one person in town had a radio, maybe. Telephones didn't exist. Plumbing was not a thing. You were farmers who lived, subsistence farmers who lived off the land. And all of a sudden you're over and you're getting people firing machine guns at you. You get thrown into a pile of dead bodies because everybody's been gassed and they assume you're dead. And then you have to go back to the front 3 weeks later. And what did he get when he came home? Nothing. Mm-hmm. But to the day he died, he was a proud Canadian citizen. Yeah. To the day he died. And he will never, you can never take that away from him. And he wasn't proud of the service in so much as he was happy to have helped maintain freedom. Like, the complication of that, it was never.
When you're doing it, it's a family affair. War is a family affair to a great extent. Like when you're engaged in whether you're a crew of a ship, whether you're an infantry section, whether you like each other or not, whether you hate each other or not, you're a family, and you will literally die for each other. You don't fight for your country. You don't fight for any cause. You don't fight for fucking medals. You fight for each other, and that's how it works. Yep. I don't know. I think it, in some ways, it's sort of like a sick way of working human psychology against ourselves, in that it allows us to take our most natural desire to protect each other and turns it into something which is aggressive or dangerous or self-destroying. Like the gas warfare in the First World War is I met a couple of guys in the legions when I was a little kid who were still wheezing and gasping because they had been phosgened, and I don't think it was chlorine. I think it was phosgene for those guys. But
well, the fact that my grandfather survived the war.
But so many, even if they survived physically, how many guys came back from that war, and how many Legion halls across this entire country were filled with guys who were broken men, who were never able to do anything again, who basically for them, the war never ended.
Never ended. Because you didn't talk about those things.
No. Who do you talk to? Who the hell are you going to talk to? You're going to talk to your wife about that? Hey, honey, want to know about the time that I had to, pull a bayonet out of a guy's chest?
Yeah. Or how about the time I had to shove a bayonet into a guy's skull?
Yeah.
It was him or me. It was, and in instances, many of those instances, it wasn't a question of him or me. It was, if I didn't do it, he was going to.
I'm doing my job. I'm doing my job. My job is to go over here and I'm going to shoot here. Yeah. Boom. Like what happened a lot of times, especially in low intensity conflicts like Afghanistan, not so much on peace support operations, but in Afghanistan and countries like that, what the Americans had to deal with in Iraq. Oh my God, that is another major war crime. But in Afghanistan, you there's so many, like, like because you're dealing with an insurgency, you're dealing with people who are looking like civilians and near civilians, and you have to be so careful in your rules of engagement. You've got 3-block wars, what they call it, where in one block you're doing peace support and you're handing out candy. The next block you're interrogating people, and the next block you're in an open firefight. You're killing people who don't deserve to die, and you know that, and you don't have a choice because that's your job. And if you don't, you're going out on a mission and you're walking along a road, you're doing a patrol, and all of a sudden the guy in front of you explodes into a ripe cloud of strawberry juice because an IED just went off. You can't get over that. You don't survive that. That is something that changes you personally.
Well, a friend of mine, a good buddy of mine, who I haven't talked to in a little while, he's struggled, and justifiably so. He toured in Bosnia. He toured in a lot of different places. He was in Afghanistan. He did 2 tours in Afghanistan, and he told me about one tour he did. And I can't get really super specific because I don't want to give away who he was, but there will be people who will listen to this and will know who I'm talking about. But he told me about one time they were out on patrol and they said, "You do not stop for anything." They're like, "What do you mean?" "You do not stop for anything." So he wasn't driving, but he was navigating. And children were pushed out into the road.
Mm-hmm.
"You do not stop for anything."
Mm-hmm.
So the driver continued. And he was like, "What the?" He goes, "You don't understand. If we stop,
we're dead.
We're dead. They're dead. The people behind us are dead." He goes, so eventually what they started doing after that was they would strap IEDs to the children and send them out so that when you ran over them, they would blow you up anyway. Mm-hmm. This shit happened just a few years ago. This really did take place, and he will never be the same. And we've talked about this at length, and he's done therapy and psychology and psychiatry, and he will never be the same. How do you recover from that?
And let's also understand the other side of that equation as well, because this is horror. The other side of the equation is if we were in the same position as the people on the other side, fighting an insurgent struggle against an impressive invading force, we would probably be doing the same goddamn things.
Exactly.
War is evil. That's all it is. Yep. There's no good guys. There are no bad guys. You go into combat, you have to be evil.
Yeah.
Now, it's been a while since I've been in high school, and I don't know if our history books and whatnot in our history courses have changed enough that we're talking about Bosnia and Somalia and Afghanistan yet. Even we didn't touch Korea whatsoever. It was World War I, World War II, and that's pretty much where it ended for us. But we're getting further away from those ones. Mm-hmm. And there's not very many World War I veterans still alive, if any. I think there's like maybe 2 left in the whole nation. World War II is getting a little further away, as we're seeing in certain current events in the United States and even in Canada with the rise of anti-Semitism. The never again part of World War II. People seem to be forgetting why we said never again. Is there something more, something different we could be doing about this day to not make those things, I guess, so far away, or to make them more current? Like, I know that today, for example, the government of Ontario has introduced a mandatory learning requirement on Holocaust education for the province's grade 6 curriculum.
I'm surprised that was
after they took out the Indigenous science curriculum and a variety of other things. Yeah. So they're very picky about what they want to be very proactive about.
Yeah. But sorry. No. That's
don't be apologize.
It's all part, right? But we wear our poppies. Again, I'm speaking as someone, that has no military experience. Mm-hmm. We wear our poppies. A lot of people go up to people and say, "Thank you for your service." And there probably should be by now something better or more profound or meaningful that we say than that, because it just seems to be a throwaway these days. What could we be doing more on this day so that we actually don't forget? We don't lest we forget doesn't just become a reflex thing that we say when we post something on Twitter.
I think remembrance is not just a day. It's like, let's face it, for anybody who's ever had anything to do with the military, and we're talking about veterans here, but we're also, I'm not even mentioning the fact that I've got a family. Every veteran has a family.
Right.
When you're in combat, you know when you're in danger and you know when you're not in danger. When you're overseas, your family has no idea what's going on, and they are on pins and needles every minute of every second of the day. So
Right.
this isn't just something that affects the people who are in combat. This affects everybody in our society. Remembrance is an act. It's an obligation. If we're going to be a better country, we need to restrain, I guess, our darker emotions, our base impulses. I see us right now in Canada as reliving more or less a 1930s type world environment. I see fascism everywhere. Back in the 1930s, we had fascism in Canada, we had fascism in the United States, and in Britain, it took seed in Germany, one of the most progressive countries up until that point, by the way. Like in the 19th century, people forget that Germany was an incredibly erudite society. It was incredibly, anti-Semitism was not really a major thing until things go bad and people look for scapegoats. We see this today. We see this here. We see this in Ontario. We see this in Canada. We see this in, well, I mean, I watch you guys and poor Paul dealing with all this crap in Ottawa back in February. People pissing on the cenotaph. That's fascism.
That is fascism. Yeah.
So if we're going to say let's remember or lest we forget, well, lest we do our jobs, because we have a job as a citizen, and it doesn't stop with voting. It starts every fucking day we wake up. We have to be out there. We have to make a stand, and we have to say, no, this is what we want for our society. This is not good, and we're going to stand against what we don't like.
Now, as events of the past, let's just speak of the last year, have been going on, where people are talking about their freedoms having been taken away. And one of the things that offended me most over the last week was watching Deering on the stand at the Public Order Emergency Commission, wearing his medals. To me, as a civilian, standing for the complete opposite of everything that those medals are supposed to represent. That's me as a civilian. With no, I mean, I have an appreciation for history, and I'm the first one to say that, if you were going to purport to improve something or say that you can make something better, you need to know where things came from and how we got to where we are, or else, you're just claiming, right? You might be trying things that have already been tried before, ruled out before for a certain reason, right? And, and then often you get, well, I was just asking questions. Why can't we do that again, right? But for people who have served, when they see that type of thing, what happens? What's going on inside when you see that?
I roll my eyes. I mean, I've taught people in the military and served with people in the military from across the entire political spectrum. I've served with people who are literal fascists. I've served with people who are full-on communists. I mean, I'm a socialist. I'm a Democrat, EV Debs. I call myself an EV Debs socialist because I believe in social democracy. But I mean, so there's a vast perspective in the military that people don't really think of when they think of the military. I've taught classes of junior ranks when I was working for RMC, as well as instructing cadets there. And they're all across the spectrum. They're all over the place. These are an aspect of Canada. When you see the medals, what you see is basically it's sort of like your military resume. This is what I did. So you've got your service medals that say I was here. You've got your accommodations, like your mentioned a dispatch, or your little bars and things like that say, I did a really good job here, and I did this, that, and that. Then you've got your medals for valor. Which say that, this person really stood up to the plate and they served the team. I have served with incredibly brave fascists. I've served with incredibly brave communists. What you've done in the military does not matter once you're out of the military with respect to your commitment to Canada as a civilian. You are still a citizen of this country. I am no better than any other person in this country, nor is any other veteran. We're all the same. Yeah, we did some interesting things. We did some dangerous things. Some people got really fucked up because of it. But we're all still here, and we're all still Canadians, and we all still have a say, an equal say in the way that this country is run. Personally, when I see people doing that, there are two types. They're the guys who did their thing and they want to wear their medals. Fine, wear your medals. That's great. It doesn't really bother me that much. The people who are doing it for show and like the stolen valor stuff, those guys, I don't have any time for those guys. They deserve a throat punch. But no, I wouldn't do that. But
no, I know, but
you know, but
we feel the emotion, right?
Yeah, that's tacky. That's wrong. That's disrespectful.
Yes.
But I mean, I think it's rude, and I think it's crude to wear your service on your shoulder 24/7 once you're out and once you're not doing it anymore, because you're a civilian, you're a citizen of Canada. If you go to Ottawa and stand up in a fascist protest in full uniform, full dress DEUs, and say fascist things, I don't care what the fuck you're wearing. You're still defying the country.
Yep.
And I don't care.
Right.
I have a buddy that I will see tomorrow, and I will drink a beer with him, who is a highly decorated individual. He was PPCLI. He was
Army of the West.
He was artillery, but he's from Northern Ontario. He's Franco-Ontarien, and he retired as a SARTEC.
Oh, those guys.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Big respect for those guys.
Right. The biggest, baddest, meanest stormtrooper soldier in Canada will bow down to any SARTEC. Bow down and say, "Thank you for your service, sir." So he wears his medals on Remembrance Day, and that's it. The only time he does it. And he doesn't even wear a uniform. He just wears a blazer with his medal, his placard of medals. Mm-hmm. He'll sit in the pub with us and we'll have a beer. And other soldiers will come up and go, "Sir, thank you for your," and they'll buy him drinks. And he's like, really humble, sweetheart of a guy, a really good buddy of mine. We go skiing, we hang out. I mean, he's just a real salt of the earth, down to earth, great young Canadian kid. He's my age. He's in his 50s. But you know what I'm saying? He does not seek the spotlight. He does not seek your approval. He does not seek your salute. He did his service, and he's proud of it, but he only wears the medals on Remembrance Day. That's it.
Yeah.
Because he's like, this is the only day I'm supposed to wear them. I'm a civilian. I'll wear them today out of respect, but that's it. I take them off tomorrow. And he's one of these individuals who, if you meet him, it's like, that's the easiest going guy I ever met. And I go, he served at Medak Pocket.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's back in my time.
Yeah.
I remember Medak Pocket.
He served there. He fought there. He was in Somalia.
That was as bad as any war ever gets.
Ever. Yeah. He was there. He was in Somalia when the guy was.
Oh.
He was there for that, and the guy who got charged, he knew, he served with him. So I'm not giving away anything. There were a lot of people there, right? But I'm painting the picture that you can see very clearly of who this man is. And again, after he did all that, he goes, "I'm going to remuster as a SARTEC because I'm tired of doing harm. I want to do good."
Yep.
And Douglas, I don't know if you know, a SARTEC is a search and rescue technician.
Oh, yeah, we should.
These are the guys. So these are the guys who, when
jump out of helicopters into the ocean to find people.
When people are running out of a building, they're like the firefighters, except people are shooting at them while the building is on fire, and they're still going in. These are the guys who jump out of the back of a Herc in 40-knot crosswinds in zero visibility in World War II parachutes in the snow. When you don't do that. They do it anyway. Why? Our people are down there and we have to rescue them. These are the bravest of the brave.
And they do it all for civilians as well. Most of the SAR operations are all staged out of, they're based out of like, well, several places across country, but their headquarters is actually over in Trenton. And they they are like, if a plane goes down, if a private plane goes down somewhere in Northern Ontario in a massive storm, there's a Herc over top within about, well, as soon as they can get there, and those guys are out the door, they go into the bush, they find the people, they do the triage, they're paramedics, they're able to do everything.
They're highly trained soldiers. They're paramedics. They're like, literally, that's the people you want. So I go out for a beer with this fella, and every now and then somebody will get a little bit mouthy, and I go, I think you want to keep it down. And I just look at my buddy and I go, no, it's okay. And he goes, I'm not doing anything. And I go, I know you're not. You want to keep it down, bud, because you don't. First he'll beat you up, then he'll medicate you. He'll triage you, and he'll be the first guy to get you on the ambulance and get you taken care of.
He set your fingers for you after he breaks them.
Breaking your jaw. Let me fix it for you there.
Probably wouldn't do that, because most of those guys are actually you actually get a pretty hard skin when shell about that sort of stuff. But
like we'll go out and some guys they'll start to have, the typical guy stuff, especially ex-military guys. They'll start insulting one another and see how bad it can get. And he's like, really, that's your best? That's your best? Come on. Oh, and now what is he? He's retired from the military. He doesn't have to work, but he's young. So he's like, so he works in construction. So we're talking the guy's made of solid steel and stone, right?
Better than me.
I don't know, man. I gave you a hug. You're pretty solid when we had lunch. I wanted to sort of switch on slightly to another issue, because you work in education, and as in Ontario. And as you know, we've recently had some job action by QP. And one of the things that you've been mentioning that caught my eye was that you were mentioning that this is a bit of a 1919 moment. And it, off the top of my head, I couldn't recall what that meant. And you reminded me it was the Winnipeg General Strike. But while you were having this conversation, and there was another history teacher there, you were mentioning that there is a veterans component to the 1919 Winnipeg General Strike. And I was wondering if you'd like to talk about that for our listeners and our viewers.
Okay, this is off the top of my head, so all the historians out there, I'm just winging this one. But okay, the war ended in 1918. Not every Canadian soldier came back at the end of November 1918. Most Canadians stayed over, who were deployed, who were part of the Canadian Expeditionary Force that were in Europe, were there for the duration of the conflict. They were there until they were demobilized. So, and just as an aside, there were quite a few of them who got dispatched and tasked off to actually participate in the Russian Revolution, to fight on the side of the White Russians, both in Archangel and in Vladivostok. So there were Canadians deployed up until in the 1920s who went overseas in 1914 and didn't get home until the 1920s after the war is over. So I digress. Okay. 1919, a lot of Canadians are coming back. They're coming back. They get demobilized. They come back on ships to Halifax and to various ports, then trains back to their hometowns, where they go back to their stations where they mustered out of in order to be demobilized. Winnipeg's having this massive problem. The Canadian solution up until the First World War and a little bit afterwards was that local governments could pull out the military, call up the militia to come out and break up strikes, because we've never really had a really good government relationship with organized labor in Canada. Right. Wonder why. But anyways, so in 1919, a lot of veterans are coming back. Now, these are hardcore guys. These are the guys that fought the 100-day offensive. The last 100 days of the First World War was a Canadian Corps victory par excellence. It's probably the best military force that this country has ever fielded. The General Sir Arthur Currie, if the war had gone on into 1919, he probably would have replaced. There was a lot of paperwork, and a lot of guys at the Canadian military, like the National Military Museum, can back me up on this. Tim Cook can probably back me up on this better than I can. He can speak way better than I can about this. They were coming back. They were being demobilized. And these guys had been overseas for this long. They were hardcore soldiers. They were professionals. They knew what they were doing. They understood their mission. They were very, very good at it. Last 100 days of the war, the Canadian Corps, one Army Corps, it was a large Army Corps, so it actually was almost kind of like a small British Army at that time, because the British were so undermanned that they'd broken down their forces, but Canadians kept them together into 4 divisions. And these 4 divisions successively, in a series of set-piece organized battles, successively engaged and fought over 3/4 of the German army and drove them back all the way to Mons. There was an entire offensive that ended the war.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the Canadian Corps that was the shock army of the British Empire, as Tim Cook called it. Excellent book. Highly recommend you read it. Okay. These guys are coming back. They are done with the war. These are guys who fought the war up to the very last minute. Like, I remember reading the report of one of the an artillery, I think it was a major. And they knew that the war was ending, and he was getting his boys, and they were firing the shells as fast as they could right up until the stop line. Why? And he was asked, why did you do that? And he said, because I don't ever want to come back here and do this again. I'll make sure it's over. So these guys are coming back. They're done with this shit. They're on the trains. They're coming back across Canada. Guys are dropping off. So their formations are falling apart. And they're just a bunch of guys now. But they're still in uniform. They're still soldiers. They're still veterans. They're still under orders. They get to Winnipeg. The cheerful guys come on to the trains and say, right, boys, we're going to haul off the trains here, grab the machine guns and the rifles, and we're going to go break up all these strikes and clear out these streets and everything. And they were very surprised and shocked when all these soldiers on these trains said, no, I don't think we're going to do that. I think what we're going to do is get off the train and we're going to go over there and we're going to protect these guys. And so a lot of the veterans who were being ordered off these trains to break up the strike joined with the workers, and that was one of the I guess the pivotal points that actually helped to swing the strike in favor of one big union.
Wow.
So
you didn't teach me that in history class.
I did.
There's a lot of stuff in our textbooks that is not that should be that is not in our textbooks that should be. For example, and something that I didn't mention, I'm sorry, I've got to talk about this, is the incredible importance of First Nations soldiers in the Canadian military experience since before the beginning of Canada. We would not have a country if it wasn't for the military participation of First Nations. The Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, Second World War, up where I grew up by Lakefield, Ontario, Curve Lake First Nation, Anishinaabe. Those guys, everybody of age, every male of age in the Second World War signed up. Everyone. Higher rates of enlistment than any other population in the country. Anybody.
And think about that.
And in order to do that, they had to give up their status.
Right.
So they had to give up their status in order to join.
Yeah.
And what did they get afterwards? Not a lot.
Yeah. We need to be cognizant of the fact that we have mistreated Indigenous peoples, Asian peoples. I mean, look, we want to be this beacon of hope, right? We want to be this beacon of hope, and we certainly can be, but we need to acknowledge the horrible past that we have.
Every society has bad aspects to it. We don't get anywhere if we ignore that. The only way you grow is by addressing the problems that you have, accepting them for what they are, and then trying to do better. That's all we can do.
Yeah. We know better. Let's do better. It's not difficult to do better with the knowledge that we have today, knowing what we've done in our past. And it's like I can't be held responsible for that which was done before me, but I can be apologetic for the people who look like me who did it.
Yeah.
I didn't participate in it. I don't support it. Hell, I'm on your side. I realize I look like that person who did that to you, and I'm sorry for that.
I'm on Tyndonega territory, technically. I'd like to be paying my taxes to them as opposed to Belleville.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Yeah, yeah. And as you mentioned, and there's other things that we probably don't learn. Like I had learned recently that Sikhs had served for Canada in the First World War. There's a Canadian encyclopedia article called Buchan Singh and the Sikh Canadians in the First World War, and there again, right?
Lester B. Pearson was a pilot in the First World War. His got his nickname Mike because his first squadron commander said, "What's your name?" And he said, "Lester." He's like, "I can't have a pilot named Lester. Calling you Mike." Anyways, Lester Pearson, his observer / gunner for his service there was Sikh. Was Sikh. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. Is like I did know about this. I did know because my grandfather talked about it, and I'm like, I was never taught this in history class. And one of the things I very much loved and appreciated. I thought, way to go. Her name is escaping me. The director of the first Wonder Woman film, Patty, from just a couple of years ago. The scene when they're in London and they're getting ready, she goes, "I need to go to the war."
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
You see all these soldiers, sick, like everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And
Patty Jenkins
basically depict what took place. Thank you, Patty Jenkins. Thank you. I had the first name right. I couldn't think of her last name. And it was her insistence that, no, we need to show this. This historically happened.
Mm-hmm.
So let's show it.
Yeah.
And I thought their depictions of First World War battles were not only incredibly realistic, showing all the bloody graphicness of it, but it the scene where Gal Gadot's character of Wonder Woman climbs out, and the theater erupts in applause. So she climbs out of the trench and goes in and takes on the battle. That was a very emotional scene in 100 different ways for so many people, because it represented a strong woman fighting for right. For good. It represented, I think, a lot of people who were in the theater who was raised by a single mother who fought against whatever it took to get their child into a better position in life. And it represented the individual, the absolute individual who fought against, for want of a better term, the Huns, the Jerrys, the evil, and
the Bosch.
Yeah. And at the same token, the people fighting on the other side were just doing what they were told. So it's like, who's right in all of this? Well, usually the person who wins, because they write the story.
Interestingly, the first war story that I ever read was All Quiet on the Western Front. And I read it. I first read it, I think I was about 10, 12 years old when I read it the first time. And I thought, Jesus, this is weird, because this is the German side here. And it made me think, because back when I was a kid, it was good guys, bad guys, cops and robbers, cowboys, and
yeah, it's not black and white. It's not.
Yeah, it's not. And the experience is visceral and real. So,
and if I don't know if you've noticed, but there is a German modern version of it on the Netflix.
I highly recommend it to anybody.
So well done.
But I think it's better than in some ways than the original. I was talking actually to my father-in-law, who's retired Dean of Arts at Royal Military College, War Studies. That's why I graduated from War Studies. But we were talking about it a couple weekends ago, and he said, the best thing about it is that they didn't have a movie star doing a well-known movie star doing the main role. The original one that they did back in the 30s, it was a brilliant black and white star, like an early motion picture star. So it became a hero story.
This was
it was everyman. And that's what Remarque wanted. That's what he was trying to get at, that this is a dehumanizing butchery of everybody. And there's no compassion, there's no mercy, there's no life.
Yeah, there's nothing glorious about any of it.
Yeah. Before we go, There's something else that you presented on Twitter that I found really interesting because when Remembrance Day comes, we usually fall to the poem in Flanders Fields.
Yeah.
And you posted one that I had never heard before called
Really?
Dulce et Decorum Est. And I don't know if you have it with you nearby.
I can.
You would like
Give
to
me
read
a
it because I
sec.
was going to read it, but I think it would probably sound better in your voice.
Oh, I don't know if I can. I really have a hard time doing that without choking up. Give me a sec.
That's why I
Give
assumed
me
it
a
would
quick
be
sec
better in
here.
your voice.
Can you still see me while I do this?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But I read it, and then somebody else posted a clip to someone reading it and said it was the best reading of it ever.
Yeah, it's a brilliant actor.
Yeah.
Here it is here. Okay. Now let's see if I can do it
By
without
Wilfred
choking up.
Owen.
Yes. Wilfred Owen was a British. He was a boarding school student, kind of like me. I went to Lakefield College School. He went to sort of like a private school in England. He joined he was one of the PALS battalions. So after the initial retreat from the German offensive, when the first British Army was on the retreat from Mons, they lost the old guard mostly. They had to rebuild their army. They brought what they call PALS battalions, where they were recruiting from schools or recruiting from communities, so everybody was getting in with their friends together, which had some bad things in it too, because that meant that when you had casualties, that meant entire communities were wiped out. Newfoundland experienced this during the Somme. On the first day of the Somme, when most of Newfoundland lost its manhood, Wilfred Owen was one of these guys. While he was never gassed himself, he was an officer. He was a junior officer. He was a lieutenant. So he was basically a platoon commander. So he'd be in charge of 30 or 40 guys in an infantry battalion. And he served in the line. And he wrote this poem. He died during the war. He died actually on the 4th of, I think it was the 4th of November in 1918. So just before the end of the war, tragically. But anyways, but his poem, he's talking about the experience of the war and what it means, and reflecting on it back to what he was taught as a young kid. Because remember, he grew up in the pre-World War I period when militarism was very much the thing in Canada and Britain and the Empire. Scouts was everywhere. Every school had a rifle range, and it was a big, big thing, and it was a great thing. So, but this is his ode to this, or his response, I guess, to his childhood, really. But all right, let's see if I can do it. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched to sleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on bloodshot. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas cells dropping softly behind. Gas, gas, quick boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone was still out and stumbling, and foundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dream you too could pace behind the wagon we flung him into, and watch the white eyes writhing in his hanging face, like a devil's sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud, of vile incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children, ardent for some desperate glory, the old lie, dulce decorum est pro patria more.
Wow.
And for those whose Latin is far behind them, dulce decorum est pro patria mori it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country.
Yes, it is, or a good and proper thing. I always thought it was a good and
Good
proper
and
thing.
proper thing.
The
Yes.
same idea. Your Latin's probably way better than mine anyway.
No, I saw both. It is sweet and fitting or a good and proper thing to die for one's country. Probably good and proper is more correct.
I'll ask my mother. She would know. She should go to Latin mass.
But I like the old
By
lie.
hodie contrary sumus benedicti deus, but yeah, I remember that stuff.
I never.
I'm a recovering Catholic.
Yeah. Well, see. Mhm.
But I like that. It's like the old lie. Right at the end of that, you get the twist, which is like one of the beauties of poetry.
There it is.
Well,
I think it's one of the most poignant World War I poems, because when Flanders Field and McRae, McRae's also a casualty of the First World War, but he was also a soldier from before too. People forget he was a doctor in the First World War, but he was also an infantryman and a gunner in the Boer War, so he was also an old vet. You can see his 45 ACP that he at the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa if you want to visit it too.
I have.
But he was this was 1915 when he wrote it. The war was still very young. People forget the First World War has I see it as having two parts. There's an amateur part and then there's a professional part.
Yes.
At the first part of the war, it's all amateur. Nobody knows what the hell they're doing. Everybody is trying to make it up as they go along. They're going with the best they have, and they're piecing stuff together. 1915, he's writing this poem in Flanders Field, the poppies go, blah, blah. Wow, that's a really cool poem. We can use that. And it becomes this mantra and this recruiting tool and this war bond tool. You see it on all the posters. I've got a poster in my office at school of the plaque of this poster with the soldier in the Flanders Field there looking all sad and everything. And to you, from failing hands, we throw the torch. It's up to you to help us out in the war effort. Owen's beyond that. Owen is done with that shit. Owen is at the point in time where he's looking at, I just lost half my guys in an attack and I gained 5 yards. And now I'm in a shell hole up to my waist in water. What the fuck are we doing here? That's what I get out of that poem. That's I think the brilliance of it. And I think that's the power of it.
It was the Battle of Beaufort Hamel in Newfoundland, where basically a generation was completely wiped out.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. If you ever get a chance to visit that, it is probably one of the most poignant battlefields on the Western Front. One of the most
There was a line in a Robert Redford film a few years ago, and they took a line from the German side attributed to the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, which, correct me if I'm wrong, that might have.
That's it. That was it.
Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and they in the Redford film they attribute it to American soldiers, which was a complete misnomer. Go figure, yeah. Hollywood.
They always steal our stuff. Most of the good American war movies are based on Canadian stuff, by the way. But that's
into that, but that is true. But it was in the Redford film, he says, "I've never seen such lions led by lambs." And that was what the German soldiers said about the commanders, the commissioned officers who kept marching them into the machine gun fire. And these guys who had like rifles, single shot rifles, kept marching into, and the Germans didn't want to keep firing because they're like, this is ridiculous.
This is murder. This is murder. And it was still early on in the war and nobody was really used to that. Yeah. But you got to understand something else here. And okay, there were a lot of people in the military that were very callous, et cetera, a lot of them bureaucracy, all that things. In the First World War, they were figuring out how to do these things. It wasn't until, and some of these lessons did not have to be learned. Right. Some of them were learned because they were just trying to do their best and they were using the tactics that they knew. Trenches were not new things. Machine guns were not new things. Artillery was not a new thing, but the combination of them in such mass formations created an environment which was fundamentally different from anything that they'd fought in before. And you get a situation where, okay, well, you also have to realize you're dealing with literally early 20th century communications. You've got maybe field telephones if you're lucky. There are no radios. People are flying pigeons back and forth to try to communicate with headquarters. Runners are going back and forth. Movie 1917, excellent example of that.
I mean, other
and so the communications is such that even if the commander says, holy fuck, things are going to shit, we need to do something right now, he has a time delay that he has to deal with before anything progressive can happen. And during that time delay, everybody down the chain of command still is going on the orders that they've been given, because that's what you do.
Yeah.
If I'm given an order as an officer to do something and to commit my soldiers to a battle, I have to do it. That's my freaking job. If I know that they're going to lose their lives, that's part of the job. So it's more complicated than we like to think. That's just like shadow generals at the back. Well, it wasn't. I mean, like in the Canadian and even the British circumstance, most of those generals weren't chateau generals. There were a few of them that were jerks. There were a few of them at the far back, but a lot of them were very much battlefield commanders. They cared about their men. They cared about their mission. They were up there with their troops. They were trying to do their best. They just didn't have the tools to do it until they had to build the skills. That was one thing. If I like that Bing especially and the Canadian Corps eventually created this formula for a set piece battle, which literally won the First World War. The formula that they developed at Vimy with the idea that we can't just blow a hole through the front line and see what's out there and go through with the cavalry or whatever, because cavalry in the First World War became infantry because horses are no good for anything except eating or towing artillery.
Mm-hmm.
Once they realized that, okay, we have to do this organized, we have to be disciplined, we have to create the systems, we have to create the structures, we have to have the logistics, we have to have the supplies, we have to have the resources and everything and prepared in order to do this. Then they realized, they tried that at the Somme, Beaumont Hamel being the first day of that, where the British Army lost, I think, what was it? They lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers on the first day of the battle that went on for months there in the Somme. They realized, well, wow, our artillery is not effective. Why is our artillery not effective? Well, because our fuses aren't going off properly. They're detonating in the dirt as opposed to up above, so our wire is not being destroyed. So our soldiers are still getting caught up on the wire. They're just blasting up the dirt so nobody can move anywhere, and it's just slowing us down. So it's not good either. So they had to develop, wow, how are we going to find out where our artillery is? How are we going to use it properly? But sorry, historian talking here, getting onto it.
We love that. And you're absolutely right. Like I have recommended to a lot of people, I said, if you want to get a real feel for what World War I was like from a Canadian perspective, you need to read the book Vimy by Pierre Burton.
I would also highly recommend, highly, like he was ahead of me, a year ahead of me at RMC, but Tim Cook is one of the most brilliant military historians in Canada. I highly recommend his work on the Canadian Corps in the First World War. Actually, also Shane Schreiber, another colonel in the PPCLI, he wrote Shock Army of the British Empire, which was his master's thesis at RMC. On the 100 Days Offensive at the end of the First World War. That is an outstanding read too.
Okay. Before we go, what's for people who are observing the day, if you wanted them to take something with them into the day, what would that be? A thought or?
I would say just be kind, understand and be respectful. Understand that we are here because people have sacrificed absolutely everything for us to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to respect and honor that. And if we respect and honor that, it's not going to be showing up at the cenotaph necessarily and standing there hopefully in the rain tomorrow. Usually it's going to be a horrible day. Well, that's a good thing. But every day, like build a better country. If you want to honor veterans, do your best to make this the best country that we have. Why do we have people sleeping in the streets? Why do we have hungry people? Why are there so many kids in the hospital right now? It's because we're not caring about them. You want to build a better country, you want to respect veterans, get off your ass and help the country.
There you go.
Agreed.
Well, kits, that's the end of this episode of the True North Eager Beaver interview project. We hope that you loved listening to us, particularly this episode, because we really loved making this for you. As we say, yeah, there's not all that often that we get to do particularly important shows, and every now and then an opportunity comes along, and it's particularly meaningful for us, and we hope that it is for you as well. If you have time, we talked about a lot of things that you could reference and that you could look at. One of those things could be Bloody Saturday, 1919, The Strike Turns Deadly, and Bloody Sunday, I believe, is also a documentary. So you can get some of that from CBC News and elsewhere. You can look at that about the Winnipeg General Strike. You can look at the National Film Board. There's a documentary called Forgotten Warriors that introduces us to thousands of Indigenous Canadians who enlisted and fought alongside their countrymen and women during World War II. It's by director Loretta Todd. You can also check out the documentary Canadian Soldier 6, A Little Story in a Big War, which was produced for Omni Television. So you'll probably be able to find that somewhere on the web. And of course, Tim Cook books, in particular, Shock Troops, as Kit Hugh.
Shock Troops is Shane Schreiber.
Oh, okay. There's one by Tim Cook also called Shock Troops. Okay.
Oh, no, he did Shock Troops. Sorry, I'm thinking Shock Troops of the British Empire is Shane Schreiber. Shock Troops is one of the 2 volumes that Tim did as the First World War.
Yeah. So these are things that you can check out. And because democracy is something you do, take some time to observe tomorrow. A little gratitude goes a long way. If you have the opportunity to buy a pint for someone, go ahead. I'm sure that'll be appreciated. But in this era where we see a lot of people complaining and whining and telling you every day about how Canada is not great, realize that a lot of them are complaining with full bellies. And
over their head.
Yeah. A little gratitude in your attitude can definitely help. If you really like this podcast, you can find us on Google, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Deezer, and the Dean Bloodell Network, and pretty much everywhere you get all your favorite podcasts featuring a grizzly bear and beaver. Please share this podcast, and we love your feedback. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and our email is truenortheagerbeaver@gmail.com. You can subscribe to us via our pod page, podpage.com/the True North Eager Beaver with a hyphen after each one of those words, and we'll come straight to you whenever we have an episode fresh and ready for you. And if you really, 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 really like this podcast and wish to encourage us to do more, well, we work for tips. So please feel free to buy a cup of coffee for Mr. Grizzly here or a mug of hot chocolate for us, as Kit Hugh has done in the past. And we are very, very grateful via our coffee page at ko-fi.com/eagerbeaver, all in lowercase letters. And finally, if you'd rather get something for your money because, you like value, well, we got you covered, literally, with Eager Beaver t-shirts. We now have a total of 6 designs from which to choose in sizes from small to 3XL. So please go ahead. And while, of course, as Mr. Grizzly reminded us, we probably will not be able to do a poppy shirt because, the Legion has the trademark on that. We do have an Eager Beaver design where the letters of our show and the maple leaf and everything has a lot of red in it. So just consider that an adequate substitute and go on your way. You can get that at deanbloodell.square.site/s/shop and get yourself some fabulous, because letting people know that you do respect genuinely what our veterans have given to us has never been more fashion. From the Beaver Lodge, this is your Eager Beaver saying, until the next time, dear kids, it can be a tough world out there, so be kind to and gentle with yourself. And normally I give the word of wisdom to Mr. Grizzly, but tonight I think I'm going to give it to our guest, Kit Hugh. Do you have a word of wisdom for our kids today?
Be kind to each other and build a better country.
Words to live by.
There you have it. There you have it. Mr. Grizzly, if you will, please roll the credits.
Eager Beaver Mr. Grizzly collaboration. Research, story, and guest curation, and copy written by the Eager Beaver. Recording, production, editing, and additional research by Mr. Grizzly. Music courtesy of Ben Sound Royalty Free Music. Once again, thank you to our founding sponsors, the Peppermaster, the Miss Fee Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing and CanadianTarot.com. And thank you to Pete Jarvis for our artwork. We love it. Kits, we'll talk to you real soon. Bye.
Take care.
And of course, thank you to our guest. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that you said yes and that you took the time for us.
No problem. Anytime.
And we love you.
Want to go on?
All right, kids. Have a solemn Remembrance Day and go out and do some good for the country.
Agreed.
Thank you.
You are listening to a True North Eager Beaver Media Podcast. The True North Eager Beaver Podcasts are proudly brought to you by our founding sponsors, the Miss V Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, your source for science fiction, fantasy, and cozy mysteries featuring a broad diversity of characters. CanadianTarot.com, your uniquely Canadian online eclectic tarot community and forum, and the Peppermaster, hot pepper sauces made from fresh farm ingredients to thrill your taste buds and expand your mind.